Hello friends, this here's David Vos. Today is July 13th, 2016. It's great to see everybody today. I thought I'd come to you guys today with a little bit of scriptural information. Because, I think this is going to be informative on many levels, I think, because a lot of people just don't understand how the Bible has been used against you, how it has been misrepresented. There are things that you just believe that doesn't say that in the Bible or any other, maybe in your church charter or something, but it does not. I don't know where we get a lot of these things, except that it was a concerted effort to deceive. Now, throughout all my videos, I talk about how Jesus did not believe in the Jewish religion. He wasn't even Jewish. Now, a lot of people are going to be surprised by that. But Jesus, as you remember, was the son of David. And, of course, David was King David. Now, remember what it says in the Psalms, and remember what Jesus said about David. It says that he had authority to eat from the loaves of bread in the most holy. And if you go back into the Old Testament, you'll see in Psalms that he was a priest. He was a priest after the order of Melchizedek. And this is the same priesthood that Christ came and fulfilled and became. And I've shown in some of my other videos, and I'm not going to go into this real deep in this video, but there was another priesthood. And it started all the way back with Samson and Samuel. And isn't it interesting that all of those people were Nazarites? Now, most of you have heard the story of Samson. He wouldn't drink wine and he didn't eat meat. And it's kind of funny to me because a lot of people say, well, what do you mean he didn't eat meat? It doesn't say that. It says he couldn't touch a dead carcass. But you see how that's translated? It makes you think that it's just because the carcass was stinky and so he wasn't supposed to touch it because he needed to be clean. No. He wasn't supposed to drink any wine, and to make that point, he wasn't even to touch a grape. See, that's how they make a point in the Old Testament. Don't even touch dead flesh. Now, if you cannot touch dead flesh, you cannot eat dead flesh, because you see, it requires touching upon your mouth and inside you. It's even more than touching, because it's more intimate than just touching with your hands. You're not even allowed to touch it with your hands, let alone put it in your mouth. So a Nazarite priest took a vow that they would never have any part of the Mosaic law. This is something that just escapes Christianity. They don't know to this day in modern Christianity. You're not aware of the fact there was two different religions all the way through the Old Testament. The Nazarenes, as they're called in the New Testament, in the Greek, Nazarene, but in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew, it's called, they were Nazarites, and they took a Nazarite vow. It was an entirely different priesthood, because you see, in the Old Testament, you had to be to officiate at the temple in Jerusalem. You had to be a Levite. Okay, you had to be from the tribe of Levi, and you had to be a priest. And certain priests had this function, and certain priests had this function. David was not from the tribe of Levi, and yet he was able to do priestly functions. And the book of Psalms explains this and says that he was from Melchizedek. In the book of Ezekiel, Melchizedek, Zadok means righteousness, or righteous. And so Meli is king, so that was the king of righteousness. But the word Zadok is a name of a particular person who was a priest. And so they took on themselves the line of the Zadokite priesthood. It's talked about in the book of Ezekiel as the only priesthood that our Father in heaven chose that was the best, that was the most righteous. And then in the coming kingdom of our Father in heaven, it's only going to be the Zadokite priests, or the Melchizedek priests, which was the same priesthood that was given to Abraham through Melchizedek. And this Zadok priesthood was given to Abraham, and it was handed down, and Samson had it, and Samuel had it, and it came down to Elijah. And he's the one who started the school of the prophets. Now, a lot of people think, well, what does that mean? I mean, prophets just were inspired of our Father in heaven. No, there was a school. What is a school? We get things all mixed up because today we have a school and you go down and there's a little classroom and teacher says, do your lesson, and we raise our hand. That's not what the school meant. It meant, you remember how people used to tell Jesus, Master, 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 Okay, that means he's the teacher. He's the great teacher. See, and remember how the disciples, that's what they're called, disciples. That means students. See, it's a different word in the Greek, and it's come down to us as disciple. And in English, we say student, so we don't quite put things together. But Jesus was a master, a teacher in a school, and his disciples were his students. And this is what Samson did in Samuel. If you'll go back and you'll look, you'll see Samson was the student of Samuel. And you see, he had students, and then David became a student. Now back to David's lineage. David was the son of Jesse. Now it says that Jesse was a Ephraimite. Ephraimite means a child of Ephraim. Ephraim is the son of Joseph. Joseph, you'll look in the book of Genesis, is in the book of chapter 49, also in the book of Exodus. You'll see that Joseph was chosen for the birthright, the one who would retain all the promises that were given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then on to Joseph. And so it would be fitting that Jesus would come through the line of Joseph, not through the line of Judah. Judah was not even the firstborn. Okay, originally it was Reuben, but he lost his birthright. But the birthright was given to Joseph, and it was split up between his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And so the bulk of the birthright basically went through Ephraim. And one of the children of the Ephraimite people was Jesse and King David. And so Jesus fulfilled the prophecy that was given to Joseph and his son Ephraim, where he said, I saw 12 stalks of corn, and all the 11 stalks of corn would bow down to the other stalk of corn, which was Joseph, and it represented Jesus Christ, because you see, all the 11 tribes, all the other tribes would give preference to the tribe of Ephraim, which was to represent the fact that someday Christ would come, and in him all the world would be blessed. He also had another parable, or a dream, Joseph did, about the stars. There were 12 stars, and 11 stars did obeisance to the other star. And the reason why there's corn and stars is because there's two blessings. There's the earthly blessings with the corn, and then there's the higher heavenly blessings with the stars. See, the same thing was given to Abraham. He was told that his seed would become like the sands of the sea. His seed would be the sands of the sea. That's the earthly blessing. And he also was told that his blessing would be like the stars of heaven. Both were innumerable, the sands of the sea and the stars of heaven, because you see, on earth he would be blessed to fill the earth with his seed, but it wouldn't stop there. It would go into the heavens. It would go on for eternity. See, it would be a heavenly, spiritual blessing, and he was the spiritual father of all. You see, Abraham's not just the father of the Jewish people, he's also father of Islam. He's also the father of the Brahmins. This is Buddhism. This is the ancient Indian religion, because you see, Abram was what his name was originally. And in Hebrew, you can say Abram or Brahma. When it's translated into a modern language, you might say Abram, but originally it was Brahma in certain languages. So in both languages, Brahma and Abram, that just means father. So Abram was the father of faith, according to the Apostle Paul. The father of faith, that's another way of saying the father of all the religions, all the spiritual teachings. And through him came the 12 tribes, which were scattered into all the earth. When Peter, who was to teach the message to the Jews, he went to where the Jews were taken captive, to Babylon. And he presented the message to one of the lost tribes. You see, Jesus said to the 12, Go unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Don't go anywhere else. Don't go to any other person. Don't go to the nations. Nobody. Just only go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. That means the Jewish people that were there and all the other lost tribes. There were 10 lost tribes. But so what's Paul? Paul wasn't even one of the original 12 apostles, because you see, he was not sent to one of the 12 tribes. So he was another apostle, and it says very clearly in the New Testament, he was the apostle to the Gentiles. So this is, see, the 13th apostle, because he needed to go not to any of the 12 tribes, but he went to the Gentiles. So if you'll notice there in the book of Acts, it says that Paul took upon himself the Nazirite vow. This is the vow of the Nazarenes, or the vow that Christ took. That's why you always see pictures of Jesus with long hair and stuff, because you see, when they made that vow, they didn't cut their hair. Remember Samson? He never would cut his hair. They were vegetarians. They would never touch a dead flesh, and they were, they couldn't drink any alcohol. No strong drink or any wine or any kind of alcohol whatsoever. And so John the Baptist also would not eat meat. Now, he ate locusts, because there's a lot of symbology playing here. There's honey and locusts. See, now, John the Baptist was the leader of the Essenes. He was the master. He had disciples. Remember, most of the disciples of Christ were originally disciples of John the Baptist. And they came up to John and they said, "You only eat locusts and honey." Now, see, the honey represents the enlightenment that John had, because he was a great teacher. But he taught, and they consumed the spiritual food that he was teaching, which was enlightenment, honey. But he also gave them locusts, which is, in Hebrew, that's that word, like that swarm, the swarms that came out of the earth. So this was earthly, physical, human, carnal knowledge. It was very, very wise, amazing knowledge, but it was earthly knowledge, because he was not the Christ, and he did not know the final mystery, see, which was to be brought by Christ, and then was given to the apostles. And so Jesus came, and after he was resurrected, he gave the disciples honey, that's that spiritual enlightenment, and fish. So he upped it from the locust, which swarms, that knowledge of the earth, to the knowledge of the sea, which is emotional, spiritual, deep truth. And he gave the apostles this great understanding of these deep mysteries. So he gave them this fish. Now remember, this always plays out in the parables. When Jesus gave the crowds, he broke the bread. There were 5 loaves, because 5 physical laws of Moses, or the 5 books of Torah. 5 represents like the 5 senses, or the physical knowledge. But they weren't satisfied with that physical knowledge, or the law of Moses, or the Torah. That wasn't good enough. You can't live on that kind of knowledge or understanding or bread, because if you eat ordinary bread, you'll eventually die. So that's why Jesus supplemented the bread with the 2 fish, and that represents the Holy Spirit, and that spiritual knowledge, that deep understanding that comes from the deep waters of life. And so when he gave that fish to the people, they were satisfied. It wasn't just the breaking of the bread, but you see, the only way you could get the people satisfied, you had to break the bread and continue to break it. And as you busted open the law of the Torah, you began to see, and you add the fish, you begin to see Christ, or the spiritual teaching. So Jesus came in the same line of tradition as John the Baptist and as Elijah. Elijah taught at Bethel. If you go back into Kings and Samuel and stuff, you'll read about Elijah and how he started this school, or this esoteric school, to teach the great mysteries to these individuals, and they became the prophets. And they basically wrote the Old Testament. Instead of the Levites, which was not the religion that we follow. We didn't follow that. The prophets did not go to Jerusalem and live. They went to Bethel, which was a different place, and there was a different temple there. And it's all explained throughout the book of Samuel and Joshua and Kings and Chronicles and stuff. It talks about Bethel. And Bethel is where Samson and Samuel, David went That's where David got this special ephod, this oracle to talk to the true Father of heaven and earth, because this was the house of El. Bethel means house of El. And it was not the house of Yahweh, which was in Jerusalem. And the prophets all rejected that and became Nazirite priests. All the way down from Samson, all the way down Samuel, Samson, David, they all rejected the Jewish priesthood of the Levitical priesthood. And they embraced this other spiritual religion with the Zadokite priests that goes all the way back through Samuel and Samson and all the way back to Melchizedek, who gave that priesthood to Abraham. Now, on the day of the Last Supper, because we were talking about how the Apostle Paul took upon himself the Nazirite vow in the book of Acts. And so in that book he was called the ringleader of the Nazarenes. Well, that's after Jesus had died. So after Jesus died, Paul became the leader in the Gentile world of this Nazirite faith, or these communal orders of the Nazarenes. But the Ebionite branch, which was the branch of the Essenes or the Nazarenes that was in Jerusalem, that was carried on by James, the brother of Jesus. He became the leader of the Ebionites, which is it's just the same esoteric schools. They had different names in different communities. But those who were there in Jerusalem, though they were always called the Ebionite, or the poor. Remember when Jesus said to the man who said, "What shall I do to inherit eternal life?" And he says, "Sell everything you have and come join the community of the poor," or the Ebionite community, the communal order. In the book of Acts, it talks about how they sold everything they had, and they all just gave it to the apostles, and they distributed it to the Ebionite community in Jerusalem. Even the Nazarenes that were run by Paul, they all gathered stuff together as a gift that they were going to take it to the Ebionites there in Jerusalem, because there were a lot of the people there in Jerusalem who were called the poor. Doesn't necessarily mean that they were destitute and poor, and didn't have anything to eat or anything. They were dying or starving. It means that they were of a communal order where many of them were celibate and they didn't have any possessions. And this was the group that was in Jerusalem called the Ebionites, or the poor. Now, some of the other Nazarenes were similar to that, but each order was somewhat different. There were certain groups where they took care of the orphans, and there were certain groups where they were just men, and they were all celibate, and there were other groups where were just all nuns or whatever. But these groups had different names. There was the Therapeutai, they were down in Egypt, and these were all related. And this school, or this communal orders, the mystery teachings, the esoteric teachings that were handed down through Elijah, through the prophets, the students or the disciples of Elijah. And they wrote most of the Bible. And this is where we get our religion. And in the prophets, they talk about Yahweh, because you see, Yahweh is a parable. The parable of the ego and the flesh. And the ego is very powerful and had control of the world and still does. So it's appropriate that they put that in the parable. But throughout Isaiah and many of the other prophets, Jeremiah and Ezekiel, it's very clear to say that in prophecy, our Father in heaven is El and not Jehovah. Look at the prophecies of Isaiah 9 and Emmanuel. See, he shall be called Emmanuel, or the Father of heaven and earth shall be with us. But this was a prophecy, and Christ would come, and he'd have disciples, and this is all throughout Isaiah chapter 8, 9, 11. And then in chapter 53 of Isaiah, it talks about how this Jehovah hated Jesus. He hated all human beings, and he wanted to crush our flesh. See, he delighted in crushing Jesus. So the Old Testament, it was written as a parable, and these were all written down as mysteries until Christ came to reveal the final part of the mystery. And then as he stood there, as he was getting ready to give up his flesh upon the cross, he said to Peter, "Who am I? Because I know that you're going to be the leader of this group after I leave, and you're going to go unto the lost tribes over there in Babylon and teach them. And so you're the leader of the 12. So I want you to tell me if you've got the revelation. Who am I?" And Peter says, "You are the Son of the living divine being. And you see, that is not the son of Yahweh, or the son of the ego, or the son of the flesh, or the physical child. This earthly person, the person that we believe or that we self-identify with as the ego. But no, we're the son of the divine being, the Father of light, who dwells in unapproachable light, who is love, and within him is no darkness at all. And so he got that revelation of who our Father is and who we are. See, we're one in the body of Christ, and we're children not of the flesh but of the Spirit. Peter got that revelation, and that's the revelation of the New Testament. So Paul had already gotten, explains the book of Acts how Paul partook of this priesthood and how he partook of the and took of the vow, of the Nazirite vow. But do you know, and this is, like I said, so much of the Bible people just don't understand. They don't understand it at all. But people think that at the Last Supper that was Passover. Well, now just think about this. Passover, under the Jewish law, you had Passover. And then the very next day was the day of first fruits. Okay? It was called the Feast of First Fruits. Now everybody knows that when Jesus died and he was resurrected 3 days after he died. Because it says very clearly in the Bible that he was in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. Just like Jonah was in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights. So when Jesus was resurrected, he fulfilled that festival of first fruits. He was the first fruits of those that slept in death. And so the high priest would wave the wave sheaf, or a sheaf of barley that was the first of the fruits. That was the celebration. Yay, we've got first fruits. They went out and picked it. It was just fresh. It was wonderful. Okay, and the day before that was Passover. Well, if Jesus had died on Passover, he would only have been in the grave for 1 night. And that's impossible, because we know the Bible says he was there for 3 days. You see, Jesus didn't die on Passover. In fact, it says in the book of John, he died on the preparation day. A preparation day, not on the Passover. But now the preparation of the Passover was the day before Passover. So what this means is, according to the book of John, Jesus died, and the next day was Passover, and the next day was the Feast of First Fruits, giving him 3 days and 3 nights to be in the tomb. Exactly the way it should be. And what it calls that in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is the Last Supper. See, nowhere in the Old Testament is Passover ever called the Last Supper. In fact, that day was a special day that Jesus had with his 12 apostles. Paul wasn't there. But these 12 apostles partook of a meal. Remember, Jesus did not drink wine or eat meat, so he couldn't have partaken of Passover. And, Passover is the eating of a lamb and drinking of wine, so forth. Jesus wouldn't drink wine. You say, wait a minute now, Dave. On the Last Supper, they passed around bread and wine. Jesus had to have drank the wine, and all the apostles. No. Read what it says there. It says that they poured a glass of wine, and Jesus said in the Greek, truly I say to you, indeed I say, truly. In the Greek, this is 2 negatives. You see, not, I say to you, or absolutely not. And in Greek, basically what that is a vow. See, this is a meal where they partook of a vow. The same thing the Apostle Paul did years later after Jesus died. But this is the night in which Jesus was about to die, and the apostles were witnessing Christ making that vow and having them partake of this vow, where they said, absolutely not will we partake of this wine, because this wine is something that it's alcoholic beverage. It's death. So Jesus says, truly I tell you, I will not partake of this. Indeed, not will I partake of this, but I will partake of the new wine in the kingdom. So you say, when did the kingdom of our Father arrive? Well, when Jesus arrived in the resurrection, he gave them new wine. And he gave them the honey, or the enlightenment, and the fish, which is that deep spiritual truth. And he fed them on the road the bread, which is, they broke it and their hearts began to burn and their eyes opened because they got the enlightenment of the honey, and they partook of the new wine, not that old wine that causes you to forget and is death. They did not partake of that. And that's when the kingdom arrived. It arrives for all of us when our eyes are open. If you notice that the disciples were walking along the road and they partook of this bread and this wine with the Lord, and it says their eyes opened. Because you see, this was the opposite of what happened to Adam and Eve when they partook of the carnal flesh, the fruit of this carnal world, and their eyes opened to this carnal world, and they spiritually died. The apostles partook of the spiritual knowledge, and their eyes were open to the spiritual realm. They were born again. And so this is what this is talking about. So the apostles all had a supper where they passed around this wine, and Jesus said, I will not, absolutely not drink of it until I drink with you the new wine in my Father's kingdom. And that's what that's all about. It was basically a vow saying we're not going to drink wine and we're not going to eat the meat. And this is the last supper that Jesus had that fulfilled the old law covenant, where Jesus rejected the law of Moses on that day, as well as all the apostles. And if you'll read in your history books and in apocrypha books and so forth, you'll find that Peter ate only fruits and vegetables and seeds. And James, the brother of the Lord, the Ebionite, all he ever ate was seeds and nuts and berries. And that's all they ate. This is what Christ came to bring. But on that Last Supper, he was basically rejecting the law of Moses, and the disciples with him, they made the vow, the Nazirite vow, that they would not eat or drink the alcohol or the meat. So, I think it's very interesting that we have been deceived, friends, and that's basically all I've got to say today, friends. I hope you guys have a great week. This here's David Vos, and we'll see you again tomorrow.